Welcome those of you that have already joined. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes. We've got a fair number of people still to join, so thanks. Glass of water. Hi everyone, we'll just a couple more minutes. We'll just get there's a few people still to join, so we'll just give them a chance and then we'll get started. All right, I think we might as well we'll get started. So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar today, talking a bit about Talent Beyond Boundaries and an exciting initiative that's been happening in relation to refugees and displaced people and trying to get them through the skilled migration program. Ajuria Lawyers acknowledges the traditional custodians of country and their ongoing connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So we've got a great group of people today to chat to you about this. Those of you that have joined our webinars before, you know, we're normally fairly, organised and we have a very set pattern. We've got that again today, but because we've got quite a number of people and all coming from a diverse points of view, we will kind of try and make this as sort of informative and chatty as we can. So just to first introduce Satya, who is with us, who is the Australian and New Zealand co-director of Talent Beyond Boundaries. So Satya, did you want to just say hi and give a little bit of background about yourself?
Sure, thanks Ron. And firstly, thanks to Ajuria for setting up this webinar. You've been, really great partners in us implementing this impactful program, so thanks very much. My background is I was actually an immigration lawyer myself, working primarily in skilled migration, but I'd never turned my mind to refugees and others displaced being a talent pool that was untapped. So when I met Talent Beyond Boundaries through some of the visa work I was doing, my mind was, properly blown and I couldn't see myself doing anything else at that point but to join an organization that was unlocking the system in a way that's inclusive of refugees and others displaced. So great to be talking to all of you today.
Welcome. Sarah, did you want to just say hi and an introduction?
Lovely. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. A bit about myself. So I've been working at Solotel now for 8 years in the HR role there. Prior to that with another large hospitality group. The other part of my life is in entertainment. So I also run a business, which is a dance studio. That's a big part of my life. What I love about HR and about dance is that it's very transferable. So very much about the people, very much about training, development, seeing the success of others and celebrating that. So being part of today and sharing my involvement in the TBB program is really exciting. And hopefully you take something away from what I've shared with you to date on our journey. And finally, yes, I'm a mum of a little girl. Her name is Ruby Rose. She is my life and also my husband. So family is very important to me as well.
Thanks, Sarah, and welcome. Hi, Cindy. A little bit about yourself.
Just unmuting. Thank you, Ron. It's such a pleasure to be joining this panel and to be promoting what is a brilliant program with Talent Beyond Boundaries. And also a big thank you to you, Ron, and your team for all the work we've done together in bringing skilled refugees to Australia. I'm the chair of a few social enterprises that are refugee focused, including Bread and Butter Project. And when Kabul fell to the Taliban in 2020, I got sort of instant calls and contact and pleas and pleadings from Afghans that I know who had family members at risk because they were senior in the parliament or they were senior in the defence forces of the previous regime, or they were active human rights advocates. And so it was such a huge relief to find out about Talent Beyond Boundaries and this skilled visa pathway to rescue these people and bring them to safety here and to very fulfilling and rewarding careers. So I'm looking forward to speaking more about that.
Thanks, Cindy, and welcome. And for I think I know everybody who's here, and I'm with Coco, who is the Law Council's Young Lawyer of the Year. Congratulations again to Coco, and also leads our sort of general pro bono and humanitarian side of the practice. So welcome, Coco, and he's done many of these cases, so he'll be able to share some insights.
Yeah, quite excited to share the legal aspects today.
Great, thanks, Coco. Okay, so moving on. Just thought we'd start with letting Talent Beyond Boundaries sort of speak for themselves. So.
We're always facing hiring challenges. Now finally able to work legally in my profession.
Sam.
The minute I set foot on that plane, I actually dared to start dreaming again.
So Lillian just told me, I don't know whether there was sound to that. Was there, Satya?
No, I was trying to message. There was no sound. There was a bit of music.
Our apologies for that technical glitch, but luckily we had notes underneath. So Satya, maybe you could just take us through it anyway.
Yeah, sure. Look, thanks for that, Ron. And, you know, the message that, you know, the top line message for Talent Beyond Boundaries and why we're here is that you know, our co-founders, John Cameron and Mary Louise and Bruce Cohen in the US, essentially had, you know, a light bulb moment about how many millions of people are displaced around the world, whilst there are businesses on the other end screaming out for skill shortages. And essentially Talent Beyond Boundaries was born with this idea of how do we unlock skilled migration as a pathway for refugees? Because we know, particularly in the Australian context, but it's not dissimilar to around the world, skilled migration, I don't think ever contemplated that refugees could be a migrant based on their skills. The dialogue is really around sort of their vulnerabilities, and the migration framework is designed in a way where you have a humanitarian program on one side and then everything else on the other side, basically. So what Talent Beyond Boundaries is doing is really challenging that notion, which is that refugees are not just a vulnerable population. Even though they flee war and conflict and they have to leave the things that they have immediately, they still carry their skills and their careers and their experience with them. So how can they leverage that to remove themselves through displacement by having options rather than just there being a refugee or a humanitarian visa pathway on its own? So Talent Beyond Boundaries has been around since about 2015. And the very first pilot that was implemented in Australia was approved by Minister Dutton. And the point, I usually make that a point purely because there is really a business case that was, I guess, the driver for how this very first pilot got up. And that is that, you know, we had an aged care facility who had located 2 physiotherapists who were Syrian, displaced in Lebanon for many years. And the CEO told the minister that she found people with the skills that she had not been able to find locally. And how do we make this work? So since that pilot, our organisation has now grown to run similar pilots that run skilled pathways for refugees specifically. They're designed by negotiating with the governments to take into account, like, what are the specific things that, you know, lock refugees out of this system. We're running pilots simultaneously in Canada, the UK, and the US. We're also expanding into Europe, and our 5-year strategy that we put together for the next sort of period, our plan is to open up skilled migration pathways for refugees in 27 countries by 2027. A lot of those countries would be in Europe, and we are collaborating with the European Commission as well to start opening up those pathways. We're working with you know, the UK, Belgium, Portugal, and Ireland, which is really exciting. In terms of the actual talent pool, you know, one of the major challenges is actually working out who's out there. Like, no one collects the data around skills specifically for refugees. So what Talent Beyond Boundaries has is a talent catalogue, and I'll go into sort of the details in a few minutes. But essentially, any refugee around the world can register a skills profile on this database. Back in 2015, we had maybe a couple of thousand, but as of today, we have over 65,000 registrants. We know there are 100 million people displaced due to war and conflict, so 65,000 seems to be still a drop in the ocean, but it does show the potential of growth, and that talent pool is growing. So far, globally, we have been able to resettle refugees and others displaced, 1,000 plus people, including their families. So not just Australia, but to the other countries as well. In Australia, since the very first pilot, we've relocated 134 people, including their family members. Under the current pilot, which we'll go into in a bit of detail later, we've had 111 visas granted under the current pilot, and they're all skilled visas. They're not humanitarian visas. They are 186 visas that offer a permanent solution. So candidates are coming to Australia on a permanent visa and starting to work with their employer from day one. In terms of our retention, it's always a big question for employers, I think broadly with international hiring. In this program, we've seen 96% as our retention rate globally, where candidates have stayed in their role for 12 months or more, and about 90% in Australia. And I think the tell in this, or the uniqueness about this program, is that employers are accessing a talent pool that has not been tapped to before. And by the same token, people who are displaced are not just viewing employers as, you know, an employment opportunity, yes, to remove themselves from displacement, but an organization that's actually picked them out to transform their future at the same time for them and their families. And that's really key. What's the vision for TBB in terms of the future in Australia? I've been talking about pilots. We don't want to be permanently in a pilot phase. The current pilot that we're running is due to formally end on 30th of June. We're already in discussions with the government. We know that it's going to be extended for a further period, but we're also talking about how do we transition to a permanent program. We have enough data to show that the migration system doesn't currently have a solution to include refugees and displaced people as potential migrants, and that in collaborating and learning from the pilots that we've run so far, that we can in fact co-design a permanent displaced talent program. Hopefully that will be, you know, a permanent feature of the Australian migration framework. So I might stop there and flick back to you, Ron, to take us through.
Absolutely. Cindy, I think you're going to talk to us a little bit just about to put some community context about this and talk a little bit about you know, a case study or two.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about the family behind this photo, actually, and I can't tell you the flood of affection I feel when I look at this photo, because this is a family that we came to know, who were helping us a lot with evacuating, particularly career women, Afghan career women who are at risk. And we were able to find a role for the father, who's standing at the back with a number 3 on his T-shirt. We found a role for him in a, because he's got a logistics background, we found a role for him in a logistics in a mill in Dungog, which is a regional town in New South Wales. And the owner of the mill is standing there with a striped shirt on the left-hand side, on our left-hand side as we look at the screen, and her husband is at the back. And so they settled about a year ago, and all of the wonderful people standing around are mainly a welcome group, and they're mainly from the Country Women's Association. And they established a home and furnished it, rented and furnished a home before that family arrived, and have been teaching them English and settling the kids in school and just being extraordinary friends. They've now just become friends, and they're like a big family. And it's been unbelievably rewarding for that community, and incredibly rewarding for also the family, of course, who are the only Afghans in the whole community, the only refugees as well, but they feel like they're very much a part of that community. So it's been so rewarding to be a part of seeing this happen, and how effective the Talent Beyond Boundaries process was in bringing in a skilled worker and settling them. And then also we learned a lot about what sort of support that family has needed to settle very effectively. And you can see some quotes on the screen there from the people involved.
Thanks, Cindy. And we'll talk a little bit more, I think, when we get into just the process and the mechanics of it, about particularly the effort that goes into the settlement side, and making sure that it's part of the, you know, people's move is also part of the community. So, Sarah, if you could tell us a little bit, or tell the group a little bit about Solitel and how you became involved.
Sure. So for Solitel, we're in the early stages of working with TBB, and what I mean in regards to that is that we have started going on that journey in terms of the recruitment process, meeting with some incredible individuals, and now venturing into the next part, which is the visa processing part. And we're in the early stages of looking at the settlement, you know, options and what we can do to support, to ensure that when our people arrive into the country, that we're set up and well established to ensure their success of settling not only into Solitel and into the company, but also in the country as well. So Solotel was contacted by Ajuria, and Ajuria have been our partners in terms of immigration law firm for a number of years now. Gosh, 8+, I think, Lillian and Ron. So I think we speak to each other and with Coco every day, if not multiple times a day. So we have a well-established relationship, and they reached out to me and they told me all about TBB. And at that point in time, like many other businesses, we were experiencing the impacts of COVID in terms of our venues and being able to recruit for our venues and going in and out of all of these extraordinary, which just blows my mind still to this day, of looking at the roster and trying to hire and place roles. And we were in quite a chaotic and frantic sort of state at that time. And myself and my team were looking at ways that we could, hire for the number of roles that we had. Everybody was looking at the same pool of people. Obviously, we didn't have foreigners coming into the country with borders being closed. And so we were confronted with a number of recruiting challenges. So when Ajuria reached out to me and introduced me, it was just perfect alignment with a broader strategy that I was working on with the owners of the group and working with the family on some of the initiatives that we wanted to look into, which was around a refugee program and how we could support. So coming off the back of those conversations, talking to Ajuria, meeting with TBB was perfectly timed. And I think a big part of why Solotel wanted to enter into the TBB program and be part of the pilot was that there is close alignment with the family and the family's history, the Solomon family, and them coming to Australia and their experience that they had with their own families. So the values certainly there align. And, from there we started to work through the recruitment process, and we met with some amazing candidates. And for us, it was a no-brainer, really, in terms of looking into hiring and looking at this untapped talent pool. And we started the recruitment process. Obviously, that was all online. And we did all of our trial process online as well, and met with 4 amazing skilled chefs who are now waiting for their paperwork to be processed. And we're working closely with Ajuria now to make that all come to fruition. So for us, it's been a wonderful opportunity. It's been well received across the group. Our head chefs are very excited about being part of the program as well. But to have very talented people come into our business is always our priority. And, going through the interview process as well and meeting with these individuals, just the way that they expressed the life-changing opportunity and how this would impact on their families and an opportunity to set up a new life and to be part of that, I think is wonderful. So putting aside, the HR strategy and filling all the roles and trying to ensure that our venues can operate, there's a bigger part to this where we can actually, myself and my team, be involved in impacting others and their lives and ensuring their success in Australia.
Thanks, Sarah. And we'll chat a bit more about the process, particularly the recruitment process, as we move on. So I think, Satya, maybe to give the audience a little bit of an idea of what are we talking about here? What sort of, we've got 65,000 people out there, but sort of who are they and what's their skills predominantly?
Sure. Yeah. So essentially this is a talent catalogue snapshot, actually needs to be updated as of yesterday. We're now sitting at over 65,000 registrants. A couple of comments about the talent catalogue is that TBB is an employer-led process, and we do talk about that a lot, purely because when someone registers on the talent catalogue, we don't reach out to them straight away and ask them about, what's their circumstance, what are their skills. We actually use the talent catalogue as the first point of call to start shortlisting candidates when an employer comes to us with a particular, job vacancy or a skills need. But we quickly found, as the talent catalogue snapshot will show you, is that the depth of talent in this talent pool is quite, is quite, the breadth of it is quite mind-blowing. You will find candidates who are, trades and skilled workers, other sort of semi-skilled workers, right up to those who are your doctors, lawyers, engineers, management accountants, and it's literally the lot. And the snapshot will show you like the proportion at the moment, but within those, so particularly, in areas such as, healthcare, where we know that there are critical health shortages, it does also give you an idea of how many people might be in nursing, in aged care, or in, in other healthcare areas, which means that we can work with businesses in a way that we understand what they need and use the talent catalogue to find people in a way that kind of targets the employer's specific need. In terms of, I guess, going one step back in terms of the type of people that actually register on the talent catalogue, we broadly call them skilled refugees, but you would have heard me say and others displaced. And the reason for that is we know that there are refugees who, fall under the umbrella of the UN system, and there are those who need to be determined as being refugees from a legal sense to access a humanitarian visa pathway. TBB's approach to this is much broader. We definitely include refugees who are recognised by UNHCR, but there's also a whole group of displaced people who may not neatly fit in there, or who don't have access to the UN system. So we do deal with those who might be stateless. We do deal with those who might be, still looking for a resettlement option, and they don't have that resettlement option. So for TBB, our eligibility criteria is essentially it's someone who cannot return home, they're displaced, they're outside of their country and can't return, for safety and security reasons, but also that they don't have a permanent solution to another country. And so that means that the potential of the data pool is actually quite huge at that point. In terms of Australia, just to give you a bit of an idea of the areas that we've recruited into, you'll hear from Sarah. Solotel hospitality has been one of those sectors. Another sector that's been really successful in Australia is technology, for sure. We've had a number of tech companies who have successfully hired through our program, and in some cases for nuanced roles. We've also seen a lot of success in the engineering space as well. So, we've had civil engineers, mechanical engineers all come through the program. The pilot that we're running at the moment under the labour agreement framework actually includes any occupation on any list at the moment. So that's given us access to over 600 occupations that you can sponsor these candidates on to Australia. In addition to that, we've also got access to roles that might already be subject of other labour agreements. So we know there are sector labour agreements, and so all of that is captured. And the rationale behind that is that to really unlock this talent pool and see its potential is really to kind of lift that barrier to really see the depth. So I might stop there.
Yeah, thanks, Satya. I think, and that might be a good, and I'm glad you mentioned that at the end, because I think it's important that we'll talk about the legal structure a little bit but just so that everybody on the call sort of understands from the beginning, basically TBB has a negotiated agreement with, has this program that's negotiated with the department, and then each employer is essentially applying for a labour agreement under that program. But that's all pre-arranged and predetermined, isn't it, Satya? So it's pretty
Correct,
much
yeah.
a fairly simple process to sign up to. And once that's there, then you have access to that broad expanded list, which includes just about every role that you can imagine, including sort of, roles that are just not available pretty much under any other program, except a few labour agreements and things like that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So that leads us nicely to sort of how does this all kind of works. I'll hand over to others to talk about this because you guys have been doing it all the time. But just so as you're looking at, for example, the figures and the costs, we've tried here to give you as much information as we can and to be completely transparent about what you might expect this would cost, because it's not a program that that's free by any means. Just to talk from Ajuria's point of view, we do this all as pretty much at cost, or in certain cases for some employers, particularly small regional employers, we do it completely pro bono. So we don't see this in any way as sort of like a way for us to profit or make money. We're doing it to give back as much as everybody else. And as Satya will talk about TBB, they're not there to sort of make money out of the recruitment or anything like that. But that all said, there are obviously costs involved with the program. So we'll talk a little bit about those. But maybe, Satya, do you want to start us off just with like I think you've already touched on the registration process, and then maybe we can move through.
Sure.
Satya, there's a question in the chat that you might want to pick up as you move to stage 2 about how do you test capabilities and qualifications and experience.
Yeah, that's a great question that I might even tag team with Sarah a little bit, given that she's actually been through the recruitment process and tested the talent. Thanks for that, Cindy. So essentially, the starting position of this process is to try and match, if you like, as closely as possible a standard international recruitment process, but in a way that's accessible for refugees and those displaced. So TBB essentially works with employers to firstly determine what roles that they may have to actually fill. A couple of comments on this, and Sarah or Cindy, feel free to jump in to correct me or add to that. This program is designed in a way that it's certainly not at a stage where you'd be looking to hire for roles that you needed yesterday. Because it is sort of, there's a sponsorship process, international recruitment takes time. So it's certainly not a quick fix program. When we work with employers in determining, particularly those who have multiple vacancies or multiple needs, we actually say to them, think about the roles that and the skills that you're going to need on an ongoing basis, and that they're always going to be a need, or at least for the next 12 to 24 months, you're going to need them. And that really, I think, sets that recruitment up for success, because we know that, you work with multiple hiring managers who have their own pressures and wanting resources. So it's really important right at the beginning to get their buy-in and sort of get everyone's input about which role roles are going to be suitable for this recruitment process. Once we actually determine what role and we look at a job description, TBB then actually goes to the talent catalogue to create an initial shortlist of candidates that match up as closely as possible to that role requirement. And then we do have operations in the Middle East at the moment. And in order to determine that someone's actually a good fit for the opportunity, our team reaches out to those candidates, by phone, through WhatsApp, Signal, whatever communication is available, to essentially do an interview or a high-level vetting to firstly check they're eligible for our program. So the broader question of, can they access the TBB program? But then to also talk about what are their current circumstances and talk about the things that they've claimed are their skills for a particular opportunity. Once we do that, we then hand that shortlist over via CVs to the employer to then go through to select candidates that they'd like to interview. Now, that's the high level process. I think there's a lot more involved and a lot more nuances in there, because often we first need to understand what the recruitment process of an employer is, because we're not determining, or we're not, I guess, imposing a particular recruitment process. Our role is to facilitate it in a way that the employers can actually determine and follow their recruitment in a way that they can determine that they've got the right talent. So Sarah, I feel like you've got a really good example in terms of how we went about particularly, testing the skills and how we worked on that for your chefs. So did you want to talk to that before I go to the next step?
Sure. Yeah, to your point, for Solotel, we looked at our venues that we know that we're always, typically recruiting for, and the larger businesses where we knew there was strong leadership, larger team where people can step in and be trained one-on-one and ensure that the environment has that, coaching in place rather than a smaller business. So for us, we looked at one of our iconic businesses, which is Opera Bar in the heart of Sydney, which is always such a beautiful place to work and iconic venue with a great team. And we spent a fair bit of time actually working with our head chefs and our group chefs on ensuring that they understood what would be involved in terms of not only the recruitment process and selecting the right people, but what it would look like in terms of induction and training as well, longer term. And for us, in terms of the recruitment process, it was very much about making sure that the job description was well defined for the TBB team to look at and understand and align skills. And from there, the interview process. But talking to the group chefs who were involved, they took so much away from that interview process, what they learned as humans as well, around the importance of making an offer to these candidates and how life-changing that would be was quite impactful. And then taking that back to the venue and explaining why we're entering into the program was quite renowned. From there was a trial process that we would normally undertake with any chef placement. Typically that would be face-to-face and in the kitchen and with the candidate. In this case, we had to do that via video. And I think there was, Sathya, a little bit of backwards and forwards as well to get that right, to make sure that we could get a quality video that we could see the skills being undertaken, that we could actually assess the level of capability. So there was a little bit of backwards and forwards with that, but we got that right, and we're able to make, well-informed decisions on, the skill set and making sure that it aligned with not only the job description, but with the venue and the type of menu and cuisine that they offer. So for us, we found that to be quite, a valuable experience in terms of what we took away and learnt, and how we could improve that process. So we ended up making offers to 4 candidates within probably, Sathya, I think it was only a 4-week period, wasn't it? 4 or 5 week period.
Correct. Yeah.
As we refined, that first round of interviewing and trialing, we improved on how we did that the second, the third and the fourth time. And we have made those offers. And as I mentioned before, we're in the visa processing stage now.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, what Sarah has shared is also not uncommon in other sectors as well, particularly with the technology sector. We've, facilitated things like codility testing for those who are coming in as coders. And our TBB's role is really working, either through partners or on the ground with candidates. And it might be things like, just so that they have access to internet or have access to a laptop. It's those things that practically prevent a recruitment of someone who's displaced. Those are the things that usually stand in the way. So it's really us trying to make those parties meet. So, in a future world, we hope that this actually becomes quite normal. The next step, so once a business actually goes through the recruitment process and a job offer is issued, that is the point at which the visa process would be triggered. So TBB is required to endorse every business and candidate that accesses the skilled refugee pilot at the Department of Home Affairs. So what we do is when the job offer is issued, we also speak to the candidates again with their families around what is the offer, go through like the basics of the salary and all of that, but also talk more about giving them information so that they can make an informed decision about their move to Australia. Because the last thing you want is them to just move for the sake of the job without really understanding where they're going and what they're moving for. So once we do that and the candidate signs the job offer, we're then in a position to issue an endorsement letter that essentially says that the business and the candidate have gone through the recruitment process with TBB and we're happy for them to access the skilled refugee pilot. I wonder, Ron, I can talk to the top level of the actual visas. Yeah, maybe
Coco might be able to talk us a little bit through so I'll skip a slide and come back to this, but maybe Coco, to start with, just explain what sort of visa it is and how it works.
Yes, thanks, Ron. How it is different from other employer-sponsored permanent pathway is there's a list of concessions that you can ask from the department. And of course, that's where after TBB and the employers and potential candidates have gone through their recruitment process, and then And from the employer side, depending on the location or the size of the business, and you may be able to get an access to TISMIT concession. And in terms of the visa application, in general, as Ron and Satya has pointed out earlier, there's a bigger list of occupations, 683 at this point in time. And from the visa point, as the candidates are from a displaced and refugee background, they may not have all the evidence that the department usually requires for the PR skill visa. So there's less evidentiary evidence like you don't need to specifically needs to show like pay slips and tax documents and everything. You need to show 3 years requirement, and skill assessment is also not a mandatory requirement. And there may be a concessions for police checks, character checks, if you cannot obtain from the countries that you have lived in the last 12 months. So in the last 10 years for the 12 months or more. And one particular highlight is also English requirement. And so for the primary applicant, there's a reduction to a minimum level. And depending on the country where the applicants are coming from, you are able to show that you have done a test, English test, practice test in terms of the actual test. In particular, for example, for those candidates from Afghanistan, they do not have an access to actual tests, so they cannot go to the test center and do the test. So they can demonstrate their English proficiency through a practice test, and this is acceptable by the department, of course, from the endorsement of the TPP. And the last point that I would like to make is also the age requirement, allowing the sponsorship of people to 50 years, where normal process is 45 years generally. So yeah, that's.
If I could just add to, I guess to go to a step back, because, when you go through the concessions, it looks like, oh, well, nothing's required, or very minimal is required. But to give you all an idea as to when we were negotiating this pilot with the government, it was really talking about how do you remove barriers that are specific to the refugee and displaced population. What we know is when you're fleeing war and conflict, you're not thinking about, I should take my degree certificate, I should take my pay slips, you're basically just dropping everything and going. But that doesn't equate to someone not having skills just because they don't have the documents. So the highlights here are really about removing those documentary barriers, but also making sure employers with TBB's assistance are able to go through a process that enables them to test their skill. So it's not a question of a person with, like, if we had someone who showed up as a hairdresser and wanted to migrate as an accountant to Australia, we're not going to be facilitating that. That's not going to work. And the other thing to note is that the reduced English language requirement and all of those other sort of documentary things, they are not the drivers for the recruitment process. When we talk to employers, we're asking them what level of English they need for their business and for the role. We're asking them how many years of experience they need someone to have. And that is what is the basis of the shortlisting and the actual recruitment process. What the legal framework does is it basically just reduces and removes those things that, to an extent are just red tape. To facilitate this employment, which is unique and it's not contemplated in the migration framework.
There's a great.
And I think, Cindy, you might be able to talk a little bit too, just about the practicalities of, like, if you've got people in Afghanistan, I mean, what's the reality? You can get a police clearance, right? 0. If you're a refugee, you're not going to do that. And I think, Satya, just to pick up on your point, for all of us involved and who have been involved in migration for a long time, and now that government's looking at how should programs run, I just think this is a fantastic example where we can all be involved in showing government that you don't need to be that heavily involved, right? Step back. Here's a situation where employers and candidates have got together and TBB is kind of helping with the endorsement, and you've got 90% of people staying in their roles for 12 months. There's no suggestion it's being abused. There's no suggestion that because these people don't have every single document that you can tick off that they're not skilled or that they don't have. So it's a bigger, like, if you think about it, it's really a way of showing governments everywhere, maybe the way you've been looking at all of this and all these tick the box things is not necessarily the best way to approach it. But Cindy, did you want to just talk a little bit about, I know you've been heavily involved with Afghanistan, for example, just like what's some of the practical consequent, like, difficulties there?
There's so many, because their documents are often lost. They often chose their birth dates because documentation was introduced to Afghanistan and people weren't aware of their actual birth date, so they made them up. And then sometimes they forget, and so they have a different birth date on the university transcript to their Tazkira card to their passport. And so there's often just so much complexity around certificates and academic transcripts and passports and ID, which Sathya knows well, because we've been in the midst of trying to unravel so much of that. And I think that there's a great question in the chat about who is responsible for ensuring the education accreditation is approved. And it really does come down to the employer on that question. And you really do need to test that that the person you're interviewing has the skills. And some employers, for example, will do coding tests for those with software coding background or, case studies or the like. But and you'll also discover that in some cases the accreditation in another country is not recognised in Australia, but the candidate is happy to take an entry-level allied role, like an allied health role, if their midwife skills and midwife accreditation is not recognised in Australia, for example. So we recently brought in a midwife who's being a dental assistant until she can do her midwife qualification here. And PBB actually have a fair bit of experience on that they've accumulated over time on what is recognised and what isn't. And there are organisations that specialise in formalising overseas qualifications as to what they are, what can be recognised in other countries. But I mean, the simplest answer is it really falls to the employer to make sure that they're comfortable with the skills and capabilities and that they match the job on offer. And if you have to, drop the job to an entry-level job, and you'll find often that the candidate is open to that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to add to that is a specific design of the pilot program was to allow for that, because often people sort of sit up going, oh, someone coming in at an entry-level role just to get a migration outcome. But it was something that was very deliberate for the accreditation reasons, and particularly in the healthcare sector. We know that Australia has one of the most complex registration and licensing requirements for healthcare professionals. But there's just such a depth of talent, particularly in healthcare in the displaced population, that our view on this and that the government accepted was that, particularly because people are coming in on a permanent residence basis, that you could come in at an allied health care level, even though you might be a nurse. But if your qualifications or your licensing is not recognised, what that initial entry allows you to do is the time to then get the licensing you need to go through once you get to Australia, but it allows you to start working straight away. So that was a specific design of the program. The only other comment I'll make, just in terms of the broader, I guess, the broader question of how do you scale a program like this to thousands, the sector lens on this is actually really important, because the talent catalogue reveals that we can actually work with businesses and industries in a way that can almost plan and design building a pipeline of talent for their sector. So, we've got experience of this in the UK. We've got literally busloads of nurses going into the UK working with the NHS, but that was designed in close collaboration with the NHS and the UK government in a way that, skills, the minimum skills required are ticked off, and the NHS is driving that recruitment process. That is somewhere that we see ourselves in Australia going towards as well.
Thanks, Sophia. I noticed the time, so we'll just, I think, no, it's fantastic points. And I think that whole concept of working with sectors, we've talked about that, and I think that's going to be part of the new program as well, right?
Yeah.
So maybe if we could talk a little bit about 4, 5 and 6 sort of together. And I think all of you have been involved in this, which is a recognition that often people who are coming from these situations are going to have experienced potentially torture and trauma, potentially long periods of sort of disassociation from, home and family. And that comes with particular issues and challenges, but also, of course, advantages. So maybe just talk a little bit about the relocation, the settlement, post-arrival, what happens here.
I can probably start in terms of what TBB does initially and what's involved. And TBB's role is really to coordinate between the employer and the candidates around what their immediate relocation but longer term settlement requirements are in Australia. So when the visa is granted, we will have a relocation and settlement call with the candidate to understand their situation as at that point and what their needs are. And then we also work with refugee settlement organisations who have the expertise over the years on how to settle a refugee family into Australia. One comment to make on that is that there is a broad spectrum. There's actually probably a bucket of candidates who come in who may need very minimal support. They might be single. There may not be immediate needs or things that require intensive support, and we do determine that at that time. But TBB's role from the time that relocation is planned to when they actually land in Australia and settle is we are constantly in touch through check-ins with those parties. So if those needs arise, then we're going to be able to support or direct candidates or employers as well in terms of how to manage that situation. The other thing to call out is that settlement services don't work in the same way for a skilled migrant as they do for someone who's a refugee and coming in on a humanitarian visa. So it means that where we recommend that a refugee settlement organisation is engaged, there is a cost to that. And I think, it's on the slide there to give you an idea of what that might look like. But it's something that we recommend on a case-by-case basis as we work with the parties involved. But I think maybe, Cindy, given you've seen, a few people settle into Australia, sharing some of the challenges or things to think about when, you're thinking about what support to provide.
Yeah, I think it's really worthwhile considering case management services from a provider like Settlement Services International, because they're very good at meeting people at the airport, making sure they've got their temporary accommodation sorted, signing them up to Medicare, tax file number, all the things that we sort of take for granted. Case management services are good at supporting. Beyond that, I think a refugee really needs a workplace buddy, at least one workplace buddy, who can just help them navigate a foreign workplace, not just a new workplace, but a workplace in another culture altogether. And then I think it's also really helpful if they've got a neighbourhood group to support them. And that could be you could approach a faith-based organisation or a sporting organisation, really whatever relates to that refugee family the best. Rotary, you could approach where they're living to see if you can find a group that will of neighbours that will rally around them, or you might even have someone in the workplace who lives nearby who's happy to tap on some neighbours' shoulders and see if they'll help. I did that actually with two unaccompanied minors, one from Myanmar and one from Afghanistan, a couple of years ago. Just chatted to some neighbours and said, would you be happy to join a group? And we did that with Community Refugee Sponsorship Australia, and it was just an unbelievably rewarding experience. I would heartily recommend it, and it is actually needed. It's swimming lessons, driving lessons potentially for some family members. Just social connection is really helpful and useful.
Thanks, Cindy. Maybe Sarah, you're getting ready for this because the visas will be on their way shortly, and people will be arriving. So how are you sort of handling it within Solitel? Are you handling it differently to another hire from overseas, or is there anything that's going to be different to your normal process, do you think?
We are engaging in the settlement services that are provided, so that will be part of it. But we've also spoken about building out our own, I suppose, support system as well, which will involve not only just induction, but the onboarding part of that. So supporting in terms of setting up details that are required to get everyone set up in the system, to be paid, and actually support in getting that done with them. The other part is the accommodation. So supporting in that regard, probably for an extended period, because we know how difficult it can be to find the right accommodation in Sydney in particular, with our 4 candidates all working at Opera Bar. So making sure that we find the right accommodation in the right area so that they can travel to and from work easily. If they're coming with family, to support where we can as well, just to create that sense of community within the venue, and making sure that they actually have a mentor that is assigned to them that will continue to work with them for the longer period. So we typically look at that, but only for a month or so, but we're looking at doing that for at least 6 months, where they've got that person that will work side by side with them and support them inside the workplace and outside.
Fantastic. All right, well, I think we're kind of coming towards the end. So there's been some questions posted along the way, but if people have particular questions, you can just post them in the Q&A. I think we've dealt with the ones that have already been posted there. And if there's none, which is fine, that means that the panel's been fantastic in providing lots of information and answering all the questions. So I think probably just wrapping it up, thank you all, as always, for attending our webinar. Thank you so much to the panelists for your insights and involvement. Thank you, Sathya, for TBB. Not personally, but thank you generally to TBB.
Founders.
And look, if you're interested in becoming involved, just reach out to anyone here in Ajuria, or reach out to Coco or myself or Lillian or any of your normal contacts. And we can start to make some introductions and put you in touch with Sathya, or reach out to Sathya directly. Oh, hang on, I think there might have been a question posted. Will the slides be sent out? Yes, we will send out the slides at the end. So thank you all. We look forward to working with you. We really hope you can become involved in this program. It's so worthwhile to everybody. And yeah, just let us know how we can help. And thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Everyone.